My name's Joe. I'm on the product marketing team here at Cisco Meraki. And what we're going to talk about today is how Cisco Meraki solutions can help IT organizations within educational institutions, primarily K-12 schools, make their IT operations more efficient, serve their students, teachers, and staff better, and generally just have a better experience managing, monitoring, and operating the network. So just to give you an idea of kind of what we're going to talk about, that's the core of our topic today. I will be going through a variety of subtopics, of course. We'll start with the introduction, which is where we are right now. We'll talk a little bit about, what is Meraki, what does the technology look like, how does this cloud management thing work, and what really is it in the context of Meraki. And then we'll go into a few challenges and common drivers that we see in educational IT in terms of what's driving adoption of new technologies or what's driving choices of vendors, things like that. And then from there, we'll go into the second topic, which is why Cisco Meraki, right? Given all these things that we're talking about in terms of what IT organizations are struggling with in schools, why would Cisco Meraki be a good choice for that? How can we address some of those challenges? How can we help you with some of those priorities and drivers? From there, we'll go into a live demo. We'll show some capabilities of the cloud dashboard, how you can enable some of these features, how you can monitor some of these features, and what the dashboard kind of brings to the table. We'll go into product portfolio. What are the products that we offer? What are the different product lines? What are some of the products within those ranges? And then finally, we'll wrap up by giving you some next steps and resources that are available to you to learn more, and hopefully have time for some Q&A. So I try to reserve a few minutes at the end for questions. Feel free throughout the session to go ahead and throw questions into the Q&A panel. Please put them in Q&A and not in chat. We will only be monitoring the Q&A panel for questions. But we want to make sure that we have an opportunity to answer any questions you might have. Feel free to give us questions throughout. My colleague Supalov is here with me. He will be answering questions as we go. But if there are any that come up right at the end or any that he feels would be really valuable for everyone to hear the answers to out loud, I'll cover those at the end of our session. So let's go ahead and get started. First things first, hopefully you are at least somewhat familiar with Cisco Meraki. After all, you are here on this webinar, so you probably have at least some vague idea of what we do. You may have a much more concrete idea, depending on how much experience or research you've done. But I want to give a quick overview to kind of set the stage and make sure everyone's on a level playing field. So Cisco Meraki is a business unit within Cisco, and we offer cloud-managed IT solutions. And the idea is to simplify IT operations. That's the core of everything we do. So we started out in wireless networking. Meraki Wi-Fi was our original kind of product line, our original venture into this cloud-managed space. From there, we went into security, then into switching and mobility management for mobile devices. And then more recently, since our acquisition by Cisco several years ago, we've gone into the cloud-managed phones and cloud-managed security camera space as well. So broadening this portfolio out beyond just IT networking into other elements of IT infrastructure in order to provide this cloud management and simplicity concept across more layers of IT. Right? Because it's not just valuable for the networking components, it's also valuable to be able to have phones, cameras, mobile device management that is simple, that is centralized, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the core of our business, really, is offering these very simple ways to manage these different elements of IT. And we've seen this be incredibly successful. Since the acquisition, we've actually, of course, seen that increase now that we're part of Cisco and we have this giant sales and distribution network of Cisco people out there kind of evangelizing for these products and these solutions. And today, there are over 900,000 IT networks running Meraki. And each of those networks may contain one access point. They may contain, a couple hundred access points, a bunch of switches, a firewall, some cameras, et cetera. So pretty broad footprint, which has been really cool to see that growth as we've continued to evolve the solution and offer more and more value to our customers, right? So when we talk about the cloud management, the simplicity is the goal. Right? The cloud management is the vehicle we use to deliver that simplicity. So I want to be very clear about what we mean when we say cloud managed, because if you talk to all different vendors or different people in the industry, cloud can mean a lot of things. Cloud managed can mean a whole bunch of different things. So I want to be very specific about what cloud managed means in the context of Cisco Meraki solutions. For us, there are two elements to our cloud management. One is communication between the device itself, the Meraki firewall, for instance, and the cloud. And that's really via a secure M tunnel. And it's just an encrypted, lightweight tunneling technology that allows us to have a secure connection between the device, right, whatever Meraki devices you have in your school or in your location, out to the cloud. And we use that for command and control traffic, right, management and monitoring. So we'll pull down from the cloud things like firmware updates, things like configuration updates, security updates for the security appliances, right, all those kinds of southbound communication. And in return, the device, the AP, the switch, the firewall, the camera, whatever, will ship up metadata about what's happening in that environment. For the network devices, that's things like what's connected to the network, how are they connected, right, wired or wirelessly, to what device, what kind of bandwidth are they using, what applications are they using that are generating that bandwidth usage, who's using that device, right, all these different elements that we can identify and then ship that data up to the cloud so that we can display it to you. Now, it's important to understand that the actual user traffic, right, web traffic or local traffic to servers on the network does not go through the cloud. It's only the command and control traffic that goes between the cloud and the device, not the actual user data or user traffic. The other thing that's important to understand is what happens when the device loses connection to the cloud. And basically, it's going to just keep operating. So the device has a local copy of the configuration that it has downloaded from the cloud backend, and if it loses cloud connectivity because, say, the site loses internet, it's going to go ahead and keep running on that same config, keep serving clients, keep inspecting traffic, doing all the things that it's doing, that it was supposed to be doing. You just won't be able to make changes to the config of those devices until cloud connectivity is restored. The other thing that's worth noting is all that analytics and metadata information that we gather about what's happening in the network. We'll continue to gather that while the device is offline from a cloud perspective, and we'll just ship it up to the cloud when we reconnect and backfill that time period. So you don't have this big, ugly, empty space in the graphs or in the data that says, oh, we don't have any data for this time period. You'll still get all of that once we reconnect. So that's the cloud to device side. The other side of our cloud management is you, as the user, interacting with the cloud, and that's all done through the dashboard. So the dashboard is sort of the face of the Meraki cloud. It's the interface that you use to go in and make changes to devices, monitor devices, see what's going on in the, either with the device layer or with the endpoint layer or traffic or whatever different element you want to monitor. All of your interaction, both from a configuration and management and from a monitoring and analytics perspective with the devices, takes place through the cloud. You can think of the cloud as sort of the broker for all of that communication. That's the second piece, is that web dashboard, and that's what we'll look at in the demo today. If you want to know more about our cloud infrastructure, our distributed data center architecture, our compliance standards, SCCA 16, PCI, HIPAA, SIPA, all that good stuff, a lot of that information is available at meraki.cisco.com/trust. So feel free to go check that out if you want to know more about those elements. So with that, let's talk a little bit about K-12 education and some of the major initiatives and drivers and priorities that we're seeing drive technology in that space. And from having conversations with educators, with IT professionals, with analysts, I've heard three major things recently. And one of them is probably no surprise to anybody, digital learning, right? A lot more learning content is being delivered digitally. So it's not, all books anymore the way it was when I was in school. Now it's iPads or laptops, Chromebooks, et cetera. And a lot of this content is being delivered in a digital format. And that, that changes the environment, the landscape in which the educators are operating, and it changes a lot of things in terms of what the IT team has to deal with, has to manage, and has to secure, which sort of takes us to our next point, which is security compliance. This is informed by the digital learning initiatives, right? Having this broader base of connected devices, many of which are actually crucial to student learning and to educators' ability to do their jobs, means that you don't just have to provide a safe physical environment, you also have to provide a safe digital environment, right? Both from the perspective of making sure that the students are protected and making sure that the educational institution is protected from a liability and compliance perspective. So that's where things like cybersecurity, content filtering, right, those kind of elements come into play, and we'll talk about those in a little more detail shortly. And then finally, analytics. And this is something I think we're just starting to see people dive into on the IT side, which is measuring student behavior and student learning digitally, right? Measuring where students are spending their time from a location perspective, measuring what resources they're using on the network or in the internet in order to help understand behavior and use that to be more efficient in how you're helping those students to learn and helping those educators to deliver that education that they're providing to the students, right? Now, there's a series of challenges that are created in part by the drivers we just talked about, but more generally just challenges that we're hearing that educators are facing, and IT organizations in particular who are supporting those educators are facing. And the three that I want to highlight are, first, management of devices. So this is something that we'll talk about, especially when we get into the demo, but it's incredibly important when you have these one-to-one devices or when you even have shared devices that students or educators are going to be using. Suddenly you've got to have some way to manage those, both from a compliance perspective, from a learning productivity perspective, from a security perspective, all these different things. You need to be able to understand, what should people be able to do with these devices? How do we control whether or not they can do those things and other things? How do we, track inventory and track assets? How do we make sure these devices aren't being used for anything it's going to put us at legal risk? There's a whole variety of different concerns that come into play there. And that can be very difficult for the IT team to manage because it's a whole new aspect to that IT management that previously, right before these kinds of initiatives, wasn't really part of their job. So it's a whole new scope for the IT organization. This plays into the fact that with the network elements, both internet and local, becoming part of the education strategy and the education process, this is something we actually see across a lot of different industries, not just education, as what we call digitization increases, right? As more and more things move to digital mediums, you end up in a position where instead of being able to say, oh, they just need internet access and we're going to do web filtering on that and that's it, you actually have to have a lot more granular control over what people have access to, what they're doing with the network, how much bandwidth they're using, because you need to make sure that students and educators have the bandwidth they need for the critical applications being used in learning, and you have to make sure that people aren't, with all these new points of presence and these new technologies, finding ways to cause trouble, finding ways to put the network at risk, put the students at risk. So there's a lot of new elements there as well. And all of this, of course, plays into the fact that you don't have unlimited IT budget, time, people, et cetera. So the fact that a lot of educational institutions have a pretty lean IT team, right, and they're serving a lot of clients. They're serving all the students, staff, and educators at that institution. And the ratio of IT people to size of network tends to be pretty low. And that means you need to find ways to make the day-to-day network management and operation more efficient so that you can refocus some of those IT resources on newer initiatives like the stuff we just talked about without having to massively increase your IT budget and without losing track of your basic day-to-day management, monitoring, configuration, et cetera, right? So now that we've talked a little bit about the environment that IT folks at educational institutions find themselves in, let's talk about Meraki. Let's talk about the Meraki solutions in the context of these challenges and how we can solve some of these problems. So we have this concept at Cisco Meraki of what we call the full stack. And the full stack is just a term for all 6 of our product lines and the fact that they all work together, they're all managed in one single intuitive dashboard, right? It's this concept of, again, simplifying IT management by consolidating it. So security, SD-WAN, wireless, switching, security cameras, phones, device management, all in one interface and all interoperating and working together to deliver a more seamless experience for users. That's what the full stack is all about. And in education, there are 4 major elements of what the full stack offers. And this is independent of what the individual products offer, which is also an element here. But it's more, what do you get with this kind of full stack approach? And I want to be very clear, you don't have to all 6 of these products. You can use any one of them or 2, 3, et cetera. You don't have to have all 6. None of them require the others. But the more of them you have, the more efficient the IT organization can be because, again, they're all managed in one place. They're all in one dashboard. It's very, very easy to move between, trying to troubleshoot a problem at the wireless layer, determining that it's actually a problem at the switch layer, and just moving over to the switch without having to learn multiple interfaces, multiple languages, without having to pay for a bunch of overlay software. So it's just more efficient generally. So that's what the full stack concept is all about. And in education, that kind of presents as 4 different things. Connectivity, right? Wired and wireless connectivity, crucial now that more and more learning is going digital. Security, which we've talked about, and that security is, making sure that viruses don't get onto the network, making sure no one compromises records they shouldn't have access to, making sure that firewalling is taking place where it's supposed to be, anywhere from the very basic layer of security to the more complex data and record security components. being able to provide that on multiple layers, not just at the firewall perimeter, but also at the switch, at the wireless, right? Other elements of security that you can provide there. Traffic filtering, which is, of course, a crucial one for educational institutions because that's where web filtering comes in, and we'll talk about that. But the idea that, you need to control not only what people are accessing in terms of where they're going, but also what kind of content they have access to, especially for students, right? There are things that they should not be looking at school, and you want to make sure that you're not placing students at risk or the school at risk from a liability perspective by giving them access to those things. And then finally, the student experience, and this is sort of ties into the other three, but really it's about, again, using analytics to figure out what are the best ways to, offer a first-class education to students. It's about making sure they have seamless connectivity, they have access to all the resources they need access to. It's about fostering a safe and productive learning environment, and all of that stuff can be accomplished more easily when you have one holistic solution where you're delivering all these different services. So some of the examples of features or capabilities, really, that tie into this are things like wireless access, right? High-density wireless. All of our access points are built with high density in mind, but they're built to provide high-density, high-quality wireless without a ton of effort or maintenance. So that's where you get into things like, oh, I don't want to have to spend a ton of time fine-tuning my RF settings on my access points, but I still have this environment with a lot of students, and I want to make sure they all have quality access. That automation and that intuitive nature of controlling that high-density environment is very important. Safety, both from a network security perspective and physical security perspective. So again, being able to manage firewalls and security cameras in the same interface is very, very powerful. And those security cameras are incredibly, incredibly easy to deploy and use. Tools from an IT perspective, things like doing a packet capture on any device or even on a port on a switch directly from the cloud dashboard, things like doing a ping or a traceroute or a DNS test, being able to go in and do a cable test or switch a port off and on, things like that, all, again, directly from the web dashboard, make IT able to offer a cleaner, more coherent access and security solution for students and teachers. And it generally just makes IT have to spend less time, again, on those day-to-day operations so they can refocus their efforts on things that are going to provide more value to the school. And finally, and this is something that we've really started to dig into in the last year or so, this idea of APIs and a kind of an extensible framework for allowing other solutions out there, software solutions especially, to tie into our products. And this is something that we've been doing a lot of work on recently. We've got a variety of different APIs, both on the provisioning and on the analytics and location side, to allow solutions that are specific to an industry like education, right? Providers out there that are building technology solutions that are specifically aimed at helping solve problems for education and for K-12 schools, they're able to now layer those solutions on top of our equipment and use the APIs to tie them in. So pulling out proximity data or location data from our access points and putting them into a solution like this, or making changes to security policies on the fly based on things that are happening elsewhere. Being able to do things like this programmatically by integrating those solutions with our stuff using APIs. So let's take a look at what some of this looks like in the Meraki dashboard. For anyone who is not familiar with Meraki or with the Meraki interface, this is it. This is where the magic happens. This is where all the management, all the monitoring, all the configuration, analytics, everything happens in here. Now, obviously, there are some caveats to that. There are ways to use APIs and other things to export data out. But for the most part, everything that you need to do with a Meraki device, you do in here. So the page that we've landed on here in our San Francisco office, this is actually the office that I'm sitting in right now, is the clients page. And it's a great example of that sort of full stack concept. This is showing us wired and wireless clients across this San Francisco office. And we can see here what kind of traffic they're using, right? How much bandwidth. We can dig into that and see which clients are using those different types of traffic. I can dive into a particular client and see, okay, how are they connected? Are they connected via wireless? Are they connected via wired? And I can search for that. So if I want an online wireless client, right, I can pull that up very easily. And in the details of that client, I can see what site are they on? What access point are they connected to? What's their signal strength? Which user is logged into this device? What is that particular user doing on that device and how much bandwidth for it? Some of this is blurred out because I'm in demo mode, but it gives you an idea of the kind of material you can see here. What does look like from a firewalling and traffic shaping perspective? What's their network connectivity? All these different things, even down to what's installed on the device, because we have that mobile device management tool that integrates, right? That's one of our solutions that integrates natively with our other products and is offered in this same dashboard. So I want to walk through some of the capabilities, some of the features that are available on some of these products that I think are really, really relevant to educational institutions. And actually, in San Francisco office, we've got this broken out in a particular way. You'll notice we have switching, wireless, our systems manager, device management, phones, and cameras in here. We actually have our security appliance, our MX firewall, in a different, what's called dashboard network for IT organizational reasons. But you could also have it all together. So if we look at, for instance, our London office, you'll see security, switching, and wireless. Our Sydney office has security, switching, wireless, and phones. So it depends on what devices you have. You can mix and match them however you like, and you get that one single interface. But let's start by looking at the security appliance at the kind of the perimeter of the network, right at the top of the network, and work our way down. The most important thing that I want to highlight for the security appliance is really the kind of security and threat protection components. So let's look at two pieces of that. First of all, we've got threat protection. Threat protection is a fancy way of saying malware and intrusion prevention. We've got Cisco's Advanced Malware Protection, or AMP, on these boxes, and you literally just flip it on. And what it's going to do is it's going to inspect every file that's downloaded through the MX. It's going to compare it to this massive global cloud database we have through AMP, and it's going to determine whether those files are malicious, and if they are, it's going to block them from being downloaded, right? Very, very straightforward. From an intrusion prevention perspective, you have the ability to go in here and say, okay, what's going on with my IDS or IPS? Do I want to just detect intrusion attempts, or do I want to block them? Which rule set do I want to use? And we'll actually define the rule sets in our documentation for you, right? The other element is content filtering. And this is obviously hugely important for schools. This is something we see all the time. We don't use it here in the office. Many office environments do. But the nice thing about the content filtering is how easy it is to implement. So you can go in here and you can actually select from about 85 different categories, and you select something like weapons or violence. You can type these in here as well. Academic cheating, right? Pornography. And you go in here and you just block those. You can use either top sites or full list options. I always recommend for schools that you use full list. The difference is top sites downloads a list of sites locally into the box. It runs it in memory, and we block based on that list. It's very, very efficient. But it's not the full list, as you would imply from the name, because the full list is terabytes in size. This list is offered by a provider called Webroot. It's what's called their Bright Cloud database. And it's a huge global database of URLs and categories. And the problem with trying to load that on one box, it's a massive, massive list. And we don't have the memory on a box to load terabytes of data. So the full list option, we actually proxy requests to Bright Cloud. We'll take a look at, okay, what website is that user requesting? And we'll ask Bright Cloud in real time, hey, what category is this in? It'll come back and tell us the category, and based on that, we can block or allow it. Now, the nice thing about full list is it actually doesn't massively affect performance. When we first implemented this, it was a little bit of heavier performance impact, but we've optimized it since then. And you may see a slight slowdown when you first implement it, as some of the more commonly used URLs get hit and then cached. But after that, it's going to speed back up and be pretty much normal operation. And this happens very, very quickly in a school environment because you have a large number of users, so it's very quick that those common ones get cached. You also have the ability to control for Safe Search and YouTube for Education. Now, if you want to monitor some of these elements, that's where you get into things like our Security Center. And our Security Center combines together the malware and intrusion prevention data, allows you to see who's generating the most events, go in and potentially block that client or change their level of access, where the threats are coming from, right, both the source and potentially dive down and do a who is, again, block them right from here, as well as which threats are most common. They're generally going to be IPS threats rather than malware if you have both enabled, because IPS events are much more common, but you may see some malware events in here as well, and that tells you this user downloaded this file at this time, which we determined to be malicious, it has this Trojan, et cetera. So it's very, very easy to get at that data. You can also see it in an events log type format. For the content filtering, we'll log that in two ways. One is in what's called the event log, and the other, which I don't think we actually have enabled here because we're not using content filtering, is our URL logging functionality. And that's in beta, so if you're interested in trying that out, I would talk to your sales rep, and they'll be able to help you out with that. But we actually have a functionality that's in beta now that allows us to log every single URL that anyone accesses. And this is a common request in education. So if you want to go in and see every single URL that a particular user has hit, or every single user who has hit a particular URL, you can do that with this new functionality. If we jump down, and actually let me go back to San Francisco here. If we jump down into switching, we can take a look at the switches we have deployed. I think 96 switches that we have deployed here in San Francisco. The cool thing about the switch infrastructure with Meraki, there's two major things here. One is what we call topology, which is a full stack feature, but it's enabled by the switches. So if I pull up our topology, this is generated live. I didn't configure this. This is automatic. I'm going to go ahead and collapse down our cameras and phones for the sake of making this a little bit easier to view. You'll notice it's very easy to kind of change this around and see what you want to see. But we've got all our access points here. We've got our switch stacks back to our core switching, back out to the firewall, and then the internet. And I can dive into any of these. I can expand these different groups, right? I can dive into any of these and see what's going on with this device and jump back and forth. I can even, if I go to a client and click topology, it's going to show me that client's path to the internet through the network. It's going to highlight it. And I can go in and say, okay, well, what's going on with this switch stack? Or a particular switch in this switch stack, right? Or a particular port. And I can move very easily all throughout this network. Again, moving from wireless to wired to security to cameras, I can jump around very easily to determine what's going on, troubleshoot problems, find issues before they become, user impacting. Again, makes it much, much easier for the IT team to minimize the amount of time they have to spend on those day-to-day operations so that they can focus their attention where it's going to be the most useful. The other really cool feature of the switching, independently of the data collection, which is something that we saw on the client's page, right? All that client data that we're seeing about who's using the network, what are they using it for, what kind of traffic, et cetera. All of that is collected by the access point switches and security appliances, depending on which products you have. But the other thing is what we call the virtual stack. So these switches are physically stackable, but they're also virtually stackable. And what we mean by that is, you'll notice when I pull up the switch ports page, almost 4,400 switch ports show up. And those are across all those 96 switches. And I can make configuration changes very easily across multiple ports, across multiple switches. So if I want port 6 on every switch, there's all 96 port 6s across my 96 switches. I can go in here and make a change to all 96 of those ports at once. It doesn't matter if those switches are in the same building, different buildings, has no relevance whatsoever. I can also go in and see, I can do this based on a variety of different things. I can say, well, let's grab everything that has a Cisco phone plugged into it, all my voice ports. And I can do that based on what's called LLDP discovery data. And I just say, oh, I know the LLDP string for a Cisco phone starts with the phrase SEP. There we go. There's every port that has a Cisco phone attached to it. I can go in here and edit all 130 of those ports at once. Very, very easy, incredibly easy to make changes across a switch topology. You can also do packet captures, you can do cable tests. There's a whole bunch of troubleshooting capabilities built in here as well for the switches, and you can look at things like packet counters on a per port basis. On the wireless side, wireless is our oldest product line, and it's arguably the most mature just because we've had a lot of time to really build out very robust functionality for wireless. And so if we look at our SIDs here, we have 4 SIDs. You can have 15 on the given access point. And basically, the configuration for wireless is shared across all access points in that what we call a network, which is generally a site, right, a school or a campus. So we have here 4 SIDs. We can dig into an individual one either by going to wireless access control or by just clicking the edit settings button. And I can see, okay, how do people authenticate to this corporate SID, right? How do people authenticate? Do they use just a password? Do they use Radius? Is it just an open guest SID, maybe with a splash page where you accept terms and conditions? Do they have to sign on through the splash page using Google Apps, using Active Directory, using even Facebook check-in for a guest network, right? A lot of different options here, including the ability to use our Systems Manager MDM, which we'll talk about in a second, to determine whether people are allowed to get on the network, or using Cisco ICE. Once they're on the network, how are they connected? Are they connected via a bridging technology where they're just treated exactly like they're plugged in? Or do we put them in what's called NAT mode, which is used for mostly guest networks, and it allows us to actually NAT at the access point layer, serve IPs from the access point. So those users that are connected to that guest network are not touching the HTTP server. They're not part of your subnet infrastructure. They're completely isolated. They can have access just to the internet, or maybe a few print servers or web services that you're offering if you decide to allow that on the AP firewall. And clients can't talk to each other. So no malicious device or malicious user can compromise another. You also have the ability to tunnel all this traffic back to a concentrator or turn on layer 3 roaming to allow devices to keep their IP address as they roam around the campus, regardless of what switch or network they're running back into. There's a lot I could show you for any of these products, right? I've been giving you kind of a top 2 or 3 for each product. Wireless and systems managers are particularly hard because they have so many different capabilities. But the one other thing that I really want to show for the wireless is our location capability. So if we look at this location heat map, we're going to see we've uploaded a floor plan for our different floors. We're actually going to see a heat map of devices. Now, this is a tech company. We have a lot of devices, which is why there's so many dots there. But a school, it's not unusual to have, 2 to 3 devices per person, right? They might have their one-to-one device. They might have a smartphone potentially. They might have some other, a laptop, some other device. So when you look at these devices, you'll notice there are these blue dots and these sort of grayish dots. And the cool thing about this Wi-Fi location technology is we can actually detect devices that are connected to the Wi-Fi, which is the blue dots, right, based on their signal to the different access points. So we're using triangulation to determine where these people are. And the gray dots are actually devices that aren't connected to our Wi-Fi but are Wi-Fi capable. So if I'm just walking around with a smartphone or a tablet, we're going to pick that up, even if I'm to the Wi-Fi, because my device is signaling out going, hey, what ascites are available for me to connect to? And that's how when you pull up the wireless configuration on a smart device, that's how it gives you that list, right, of what you can connect to. So we can use that to see what does foot traffic look like over time, right? What do the foot traffic paths look like? What areas have higher people or device density at different times of day? We can see dwell time. How long are people staying in certain areas? And all this data can be used from a dashboard perspective, right, viewed in dashboard, or exported via our APIs into other solutions, like I said, that are developed specifically for K-12 institutions to help solve specific problems that, that exist in that particular type of deployment. Now, Systems Manager is a big one. There's a lot of functions and features to Systems Manager, so I'm going to try to limit myself to just a couple. And I want to show you, I think, 3 major things: how to push apps, how to push profiles, and how to control who gets access to the network and what level of access they get based on what we call device posture. So first things first, pushing apps with Systems Manager. The coolest thing about Systems Manager to me is actually how easy it is to enroll in it. So as an example, if I go to m.meraki.com, I'm going to get this SM setup page. If I enter what's called a network ID, which is provided here in dashboard, I would just go to Systems Manager, add devices, and it's going to give me, okay, what type of device am I trying to enroll? Let's say, in my case, it's a Mac OS device. Here's the network ID, or I can download the agent manually, right? I throw that network ID in here. It's going to register me to this Systems Manager network. I'm going to get that MDM profile, and then it's going to start pushing whatever apps or configuration I've configured here in Systems Manager. Very, very simple. You can also use Apple's DEP, or Device Enrollment Program, to purchase devices from Apple directly that already are enrolled in your Systems Manager instance. That type of functionality, to my knowledge, does not exist for Android today, but you can absolutely also enroll Android devices. And Android has added a lot of cool MDM capability in the last year or so that helps us to do more with that operating system as well. So if we look at, let's add an application. I want to push, now obviously this isn't necessarily one you'd want to push, but as an example, I want to push an Angry Birds app. And specifically, because why wouldn't you, I want the Star Wars one. And now I've got this application, and I can scope who's going to get it, right? So is this going to go to everybody, or only devices that are tagged as student devices? Maybe only students that are in a particular geofencing area. They're students at a particular campus, right? Maybe they're only students that are in that geofencing area and have some other element. So there's 2 different types of what are called tags. And these are the tags. These things that we use to scope are tags. They're really just labels. And the tags are either static or dynamic. So if you're looking at tags, you can see here this student label that doesn't have this little magic wand thing next to it. That's a static tag. It's something I've gone in and labeled these devices as student devices. A dynamic tag is geofencing, or it's Active Directory user, right, user group, or it's something like what type of device is it? Is it a Mac or an iOS device? Is it an Android device? Is it a Windows device? Or is it in compliance with certain security policies? You can configure things like has to have a passcode, has to have a certain strength of passcode, can't have certain applications installed, must have certain applications installed, can't be jailbroken. You can enter those as elements of a security policy and use those as tags to scope things as well. And if something changes, if somebody removes a required application from the device, we will automatically determine that device is no longer in compliance with the security policy and change which apps it has, what policies it gets, what access it has based on that change in real time. Beyond apps, you get into settings, and settings are how you deploy basically MDM profiles. So this is things like what can you do with the device? Do I want to deploy maybe a Wi-Fi profile to the device? So if I go to add settings, I can see a bunch of different things that I can do. I can deploy restrictions. Again, these can all be scoped by tag. What can someone do with this device or not do with this device, right? We can deploy things like Wi-Fi profiles. So everyone's one-to-one iPad automatically gets the Wi-Fi connection information for our school Wi-Fi without any need to do anything on the student side or even an IT provisioning side manually on the device. Let's deploy our wallpaper, our home screen, or our lock screen. Let's deploy passcode restrictions. Let's deploy all these different things, content even, through what's called Backpack or web clips, right? Giving content directly to those users. So the ability to control all of this natively from Systems Manager from the cloud makes it much easier to manage that fleet of mobile devices that a lot more educational IT organizations have to manage nowadays. And finally, as I mentioned, the last thing I want to show is how you use this information to control access at the network layer. So we have this concept called group policies. And group policies are applied on the wireless access points and the security appliances. And they allow you to control things like what are the firewall policies for a particular group of users, right? You can schedule them for certain days of the week or certain times of day, or you can have them on all the time. You can control bandwidth limits. You can control firewall rules at layer 3 and at the application layer. You can control, what are people able to do from a firewalling perspective. You can control quality of service. You can even control things like content filtering. So if we create a new policy, oh, sorry, I forgot. This one doesn't actually have, let's go to London where we have the security appliance in the same network, and I'll show you what this looks like. So if we go to the group policies in London, we can control things like, is malware protection enabled device? We can control things like what URL categories are blocked or allowed for these devices, only the ones in this group, and we can either append to the network-wide list or override the network-wide list, either way. Once we have these policies, we can apply them with Systems Manager using what's called Sentry. And basically what that allows you to do is say, any device in our Systems Manager network that is a student device, it's on campus, and it's in compliance with our BYOD policy, which says that you can't have any Tor browser, you can't have any BitTorrent software, et cetera, et cetera. Well, then let's apply a certain group policy at the network level to control what people can do with that device very, very easily, right? And again, if any of those dynamic elements change, we'll change the policy on the security appliance or the wireless dynamically. The last thing I want to show you before we jump out of this demo, I'm not going to get into the phone just because it's something that I think is hard to really capture in this kind of broader demo, but it is worth knowing we do have a phone system, an IP phone option through Meraki, and what it allows you to do is deploy phones without any need for a PBX or what's called or basically any kind of SIP control locally. You don't need a server or a PBX, you just need the phones and internet. And what it allows you to do is provision phone numbers or port in phone numbers directly from the dashboard without needing to go out and build a contract with a SIP provider externally, and actually assign those numbers to phones. You can do announcement groups and conference groups. You can do IVRs. You can look at call statistics over time. All that stuff is available natively in Dashboard. But since I'm running low on time, the last thing I want to show you here in the demo is the camera. And the camera is our newest product. We've only had the camera for a few months now. and it's been incredibly popular already. And what we've done with this camera is similar to what I just described for the phone. We've decided that the model should be you need a camera, power, you need network access, and that's it. There's no NVR, network video recorder. There's no storage software or storage hardware that you need in order to have all this video be stored locally. It's all stored on the camera itself. So the cameras have solid-state storage built in, and you can actually go into dashboard and say, okay, this camera, I want to view this feed, and it's going to pull it up right here in dashboard, and it's going to do one of two things. It's going to either feed this from the camera directly to your browser locally over the network if you're on site, or it's going to send it over what we call a cloud stream if you're not on site. So we'll only use internet bandwidth if you actually need to use it. When you have one of these feeds up, you can do things like motion search. So when was there motion in this area? And you can pull up that motion search clip and see that specific event. And if we watch this, because it puts a little bit of a buffer on either side, so there's a little bit of time there where nothing's happening, but we can see someone move very slightly through that space, and we can see in blue there their path, right? We can also crank the motion sensitivity down, so we only see events that have significant motion. So this one's got a little bit more movement in the specific area we've specified here. And while we wait for that, I want to walk through. So there's a little bit, and then it looks like, there we go, someone's coming with a bike. This is our bike room camera, and they've gone right through our coverage area that we've specified, so we're going to see that there. So it gives you the ability to go through and see, okay, instead of having to fast forward through a bunch of footage to see when something happened, oh, someone stole something from this table. Show me every time something moved right there, and very easily find what you're looking for. Once you find it, you can export it. You can either export it to file or as a URL that you can just give to law enforcement or any enforcement organization, and they can go in and just see that over the web, right? They don't need access to your dashboard. You can just give them access to that one clip by sending them the URL. They'll be able to see that event. There's also analytics built in so that we can track where was their movement. Again, where was the most common movement in these areas at different times. With that, I'm going to jump out of the dashboard, jump back into the slides just for a couple minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap up with some questions. So all of this together, right, this full stack concept allows you to bring all these different elements of IT into one cohesive story, and from an IT perspective, be able to manage that much more efficiently and offer a lot more kind of flexible service very efficiently without having to spend a ton of IT effort, time, resources on doing that, right? I want to highlight the 6 product lines really briefly. We walked through most of them in the demo, but I want to give you an idea of kind of what the different hardware platforms are that we deliver these services on. So on the wireless side, we have what are called our MR wireless access points. We have indoor models, outdoor models, in-room models that are designed more around the hotel room or hall of residence dormitory type approach, where you have a few wired ports and they mount. The outdoor units can have external antennas. They're in hardened enclosures for auditoriums or outdoor spaces. So a variety of different hardware elements there. On the security side, we have a range of security appliances all the way from a small branch unit that you might use in a small satellite operation up to a campus firewall or security device in our higher end of the portfolio. All of these have built-in intrusion prevention. All of these have built-in content filtering. All of them have built-in SD-WAN functionality, malware protection, layer 7 firewalling, auto VPN, which I didn't talk about today, but if you have multiple locations, if you have a distributed deployment of multiple satellite locations, can be very useful for connecting those locations together or connecting them to a data center. All these different capabilities offered on all the different products, all the appliances. On the switching side, of course, there's a broad range of hardware. You've got anything from an 8-port layer 2 switch all the way up to 32 or 48-port aggregation with 10 gigabit fiber, everything in between. So layer 2 and layer 3 switching, aggregation switching, multi-gigabit switching, a broad range of different switch options there. Enterprise mobility management, which is the kind of product market that Systems Manager sits in. Obviously, there's no hardware. It's just a software agent. But it's available on a variety of different operating systems, iOS, Android, Mac, Windows. You also have Chrome OS capabilities as well. And we talked through some of the capabilities that you have with Systems Manager, broad range of things you can do in inventory tracking, compliance, management, control, and application and content delivery perspective. MC, the phone system, we talked about very briefly, gives you the ability to deploy phones make announcements through those phones instead of over a traditional PA system, easily deploy these without the need for a PBX infrastructure. It's a very, very simple way to deploy IP phones. And then the security cameras, which we just looked at. No NVR, no VMS, for those who are familiar with the camera market. Network video recorder is the NVR, the system that actually stores the footage in a traditional camera system. The VMS is the software, video management software. The motion search capability, right? All of that built in natively to the platform, and we're going to continue to add new features to this. So we have 2 models today, indoor and outdoor. We'll continue to add new models. We'll continue to add new features to the existing models through a software delivery model there. And all these cameras have a 3-year warranty, which is actually pretty impressive, especially for the outdoor unit. I want to give an example of a school that I've actually visited that uses this technology. So Lee Summit School District, I visited a couple of their different schools. This is in Lee Summit, Missouri, just outside of Kansas City, actually. And they have over 30 schools in the school district with a total of over 20,000 users, about 18,000 students, about 2,000 staff. And they have an IT team that's in one centralized location. Obviously, they do sometimes travel to the schools in the school district. And what they do is they use this to just, again, make the IT operations simpler. They've got over 2,000 devices, over 23,000 average clients per day between students, educators, staff, and guests, over 160 terabytes of network throughput per week across the school district. And the cool thing about that number, that 160 terabytes number, or the clients per day number, is that's data that they were able to just gather right there in dashboard across their whole school district, across all their schools in one page. So again, very easy to get at this information. But they do all of this from a management perspective with a fairly small team, and by using Meraki to make those network management tasks simpler, they're able to provide consistent, secure, and reliable connectivity and refocus their IT resources on new initiatives that they want to spend more time on. There are a whole variety of other schools that are using this technology all over the world. If you go to meraki.cisco.com/customers, you can see some of the case studies and other educational institutions that are using Meraki today. Some of them are just using wireless, some of them are just using switching, some are using 2, 3, all 6 products, right? But you can see some of that information on our website. And again, I want to reiterate this concept of the full stack. So you don't need all 6 products. You don't even need more than 1 product. You can have any of these operate independently, but a lot of them work together in ways that really add a ton of value both for the IT team and the broader school institution. So it's worth looking at, what could we get out of being able to manage our security, switching, wireless, mobility management, phones, and cameras, or any combination thereof, all in one place in one intuitive cloud interface. So what's next? Well, you've got a few options. If you want to try any of our equipment, you can do an evaluation. Go to meraki.cisco.com/eval. We'll ship the gear to you. We'll ship it back. If we ship you that gear, you try it, you decide you want to purchase, you can just keep that same gear. We make it very easy. You can also go in and check out our blog, which is where we put information about new features, new products, things that are going on with the company. So if you want to keep up to date on the latest and greatest with Cisco Meraki, that's the site for that. And then finally, for all things Meraki, your best resource is your Meraki rep. So if you know who your rep is already, great. If you don't, you can either check out your webinar reminder email, which should have information for your rep, or you can go to meraki.cisco.com/contact to get in touch with a rep who can help you. And with that, let's see what kind of questions we've got and see if Supala left me any questions. Nope, looks like he managed to cover everything. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll give you 8 minutes of your day back. Hopefully you learned some good stuff today, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your week. Thanks again.